My daughter looked at the cake in my hands and laughed. "Mom," she said, "if you really want to give me the best birthday gift, just die already." Her friends burst out laughing, thinking it was a joke, but she meant every word. I stood there, a 72-year-old woman holding a $200 chocolate cake, while my only child wished for my death. Everyone kept talking, the music kept playing, but I couldn't hear a thing. 45 years of love erased in 5 words. That was the moment I realized I had raised my own executioner. If words have ever broken you like that, hit the like button or leave a comment. I read them all. Now let me take you back to where it all began. When the door closed behind me, I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel the weight of the cake box slipping from my hands or the frosting staining my shoes. I just stood there on her porch, staring at the welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home" and realizing it had never been mine. The laughter inside went on. Someone turned the music louder. I could still hear Rebecca's voice, "Just die already," echoing in my ears like a sentence that couldn't be appealed. I walked back to my car, one slow step at a time, afraid my legs might give out. I had driven 40 minutes across town for that party. 40 minutes of rehearsing what to say, of imagining her smile when she saw me. I had even put on lipstick, the red shade she once said made me look fancy. The drive back felt endless. I didn't even turn on the radio. I didn't cry either. My tears stayed frozen somewhere deep, like they were waiting for permission. At the red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. My face looked older than I remembered, not from age, but from something heavier. Betrayal does that. It ages you in seconds. When I got home, I placed what was left of the cake on the counter and sat down at the table. The candles were still there, half melted, bent like old bones. I had imagined blowing them out with her, just like when she was little. Now I stared at them and whispered, "Happy birthday, Rebecca." The words barely made a sound. They felt ridiculous, like an echo from another life. The apartment was quiet. The clock ticked loud enough to hurt. I made tea but forgot to drink it. My mind kept looping through the same scene, her face, the tone of her voice, the laughter that followed. I wanted to believe she was joking, that it was the wine talking or the pressure of being the host. But the truth is, she had meant it. I saw it in her eyes. There was no humor there, no hesitation, just disgust. How did we get here? I raised that girl on my own after her father died. I gave her everything, my youth, my health, my savings, my peace. And yet, somehow, I became a burden. Was I too present, too protective, too loving? I used to think love couldn't go wrong, that if you gave enough, eventually the world, or your child, would give it back. But that's not how it works, is it? Some people only learn to take. I stood up and walked to the shelf where I kept her old photos. There she was, a baby in my arms, all cheeks and curls, a gap-toothed girl with frosting on her nose, a young woman in a white wedding dress, eyes full of dreams I had helped her pay for. Every stage of her life was framed on my wall, but mine wasn't in any of them. I was always behind the camera, behind the bills, behind the sacrifices. I had disappeared long before she asked me to. I picked up the picture from her graduation day. She had been crying that morning because her shoes didn't match the gown. I ran all over town to find another pair. I didn't eat lunch. I missed my own nurse shift. But when she walked across that stage, she smiled at me and mouthed, "Thank you, Mum." That memory used to make me proud. Now it made me ache. The clock hit midnight. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark. The city outside was asleep, but my mind was wide awake, replaying 45 years in reverse. The nights I stayed up with her fevers, the mornings I left early for work to afford her college tuition, the days I cancelled my plans to watch her kids. Every single moment stacked into one realization. I had built my life around a person who no longer saw me as human. My phone buzzed once, a notification from Facebook. Rebecca Davis posted new photos, birthday dinner with friends. I stared at the picture. She was smiling, holding a glass of champagne. David had his arm around her. The kids were nowhere to be seen. Her caption said, "Best birthday ever." I laughed, a dry, broken sound I didn't recognize as my own. Best birthday ever. Of course it was. She had finally gotten what she wanted, a world where I didn't exist. I stood, walked to the sink, and scraped the cake into the trash. The sound of it hitting the metal bin was strangely satisfying. I washed the plate, wiped the counter, and looked around the tiny apartment that had seen me through every version of motherhood, the devoted one, the tired one, the invisible one. Somewhere inside, a thought began to grow, faint but steady. Maybe it was time to stop living like a ghost in her story. Maybe it was time to write my own. I turned off the light and whispered into the dark, "You wanted me gone, Rebecca. Maybe this time, I'll really go." I didn't become a mother the day Rebecca was born. I became a mother the day I realized no one else was coming to save us. Her father, Mark, died when she was 6 months old, a car accident on his night shift. I remember sitting in that hospital hallway, holding a pink blanket that still smelled like baby powder, and promising her tiny face, "You will never go without love, no matter what it costs me." So I went back to work just 2 weeks later. 12-hour shifts at the county hospital, sometimes double. I slept in the break room, ate from vending machines, pumped milk between emergencies. My whole life shrank to 2 things, keeping her fed and keeping the lights on. When Rebecca was 3, she got pneumonia. The bills came faster than her fever broke. Insurance didn't cover most of it, so I sold my mother's wedding ring to buy antibiotics. I still remember the look on the pharmacist's face when I handed him a gold band instead of a credit card. He hesitated, then said quietly, "You must really love your child." I didn't answer. Love wasn't the question. Survival was. Rebecca recovered, and for a while I thought we were okay. She was such a bright little girl, always singing, always asking questions. She'd run to the door when I came home and yell, "Mommy's home!" like I was the best part of her world. Those were the years that kept me alive. But love makes you blind in the sweetest way. I thought giving her everything was the same as loving her well. When she turned 16 and wanted a designer prom dress, the one that cost $800, I worked weekends for months to buy it. I still had blisters from my nurse shoes when she walked out that night glowing in pink satin. She hugged me and whispered, "You're the best mum ever." I cried in the kitchen because I believed her. Then came college. She changed majors 3 times, each one more expensive than the last. I took a second mortgage to pay her tuition. I told everyone at work I was proud that my girl was finding herself. The truth was I was losing myself piece by piece. But I didn't mind. I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do, disappear quietly behind their children's success. When she married David, I paid for the entire wedding. $35,000, gone in 1 weekend. I didn't even sit down to eat that day. I was too busy making sure everything looked perfect. She never noticed. "Thanks, Mum," she said with a quick hug before leaving for her honeymoon. That was the moment I felt the first crack, small but deep. Then came the house, her dream home. "Mum, we found the perfect one," she said over the phone. "We just need help with the down payment." I didn't even hesitate. I drained my retirement savings and handed her a check for $150,000. She cried. She said she'd pay me back someday. I told her she didn't have to. I thought her happiness was payment enough. For years, I mowed her lawn when David was too busy. I babysat the twins every weekend. I paid for their braces, their birthday parties, their vacations. Every time she said, "Mom, could you?" I said yes. I said yes until yes became my identity. And yet, somewhere along the way, her voice changed. Her hugs got shorter. Her visits got rarer. My name in her phone turned from Mommy to Mum, then from Mum to Evelyn. That's when I should have known. Love can turn into entitlement so quietly you don't even notice until it's too late. The first time I noticed the shift, it was so small I almost ignored it. I had stopped by her house unannounced, something I used to do all the time when the twins were little. I brought lasagna, her favourite. Rebecca opened the door halfway, phone pressed to her ear, and whispered, "Mom, You can't just show up like this. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a stranger you're trying to be polite to. I froze on the porch, holding that casserole like an apology. She sighed, took it from me, and said she'd call later. She didn't. That was how it started. Little walls, invisible but sharp. The calls grew shorter. Can't talk now, busy. The hugs at Christmas turned into side pats. When I asked if she wanted to come over for Sunday dinner, she said, "We'll see," which always meant no. I told myself it was normal. She had a job, kids, responsibilities. Life gets busy. But mothers know. There's a tone that slips in when love starts fading. A quiet impatience, a forced kindness. I could feel it every time she said, "I'm fine, Mum," or "You don't have to worry about us." It sounded like a goodbye disguised as independence. Then came the comments. "Mom, you don't understand how things work now. You always make everything about you. You worry too much." Each word felt like a paper cut. Small, but they added up until I was bleeding inside. I remember one Thanksgiving. I had spent 3 days cooking, setting the table, making sure her favorite pie was perfect. She walked in, looked around, and said, "Wow, Mom, this is a lot." David laughed. "Your mum doesn't know how to relax." They both chuckled. I laughed too, but something broke in that moment. I realized I had become the family joke, the overbearing, outdated mother who didn't know when to stop caring. After that, I started pulling back, just a little. I stopped calling every morning. I waited for her to call first. Sometimes she didn't. Sometimes weeks went by. When she finally did, it was because she needed something: a loan for car repairs, a babysitter for a work trip, help with the twins' braces. And every time I told myself, this is how she shows love, through need. But need isn't love, it's dependency wearing a mask. One night, after sending her another check, I sat at my kitchen table and did the math. I wrote down every dollar I'd given her, every bill I'd covered. The total looked like a mortgage, nearly $500,000 over 40 years. $500,000 to earn a child's affection. I laughed bitterly. If love were a business, I'd gone bankrupt long ago. I started noticing things that had been invisible before. How she'd roll her eyes when I gave advice. How David would thank me for helping but never look me in the eye. How the twins called me grandma only when they wanted presents. I began to see that I wasn't part of their family. I was their safety net, their backup plan, their ATM with a heartbeat. One afternoon, Rebecca dropped by, something she hadn't done in months. She said she needed to talk. I felt hope rise stupidly in my chest. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she remembered who I was to her. She sat at the table, scrolled through her phone and said, "Mom, I need you to co-sign a small loan for the house renovations. It's just a formality." A formality. That's what my name had become. A signature. A safety guarantee. I stared at her and asked, "Rebecca, do you even know what my favorite meal is?" She frowned. "What kind of question is that?" It's the kind of question a mother asks when she starts realizing her daughter doesn't see her anymore. She laughed nervously. "You're being dramatic." Maybe I was, but I also knew that somewhere between the prom dress and the down payment, I had stopped being a mother and become a convenience. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that hurts. I sat in the dark, thinking about every version of myself I had been for her, the nurse, the cook, the babysitter, the rescuer, and I realized something I had never dared to think before. Maybe she didn't grow up to be cold. Maybe I taught her to be, because every time she asked for more, I gave it. Every time she crossed a line, I erased it. And now there was nothing left to erase. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, one of those lazy days when the sky looked tired and I told myself I wouldn't call her. I was determined to let her have her space. But around 5, my phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe she missed me. Maybe she just wanted to talk. I answered too quickly. "Mom," she said, voice clipped, businesslike. "Can you transfer me $2,000 by tomorrow? David's between jobs again and we've got bills piling up. I'll pay you back next month." She always said next month. Next month never came. "Rebecca," I said softly. I can't keep doing this. Doing what? She snapped. Saving you every time something goes wrong. There was silence. Then she laughed, a short, cold sound. Wow, you make it sound like I'm a charity case. I swallowed hard. I'm just tired, honey. I'm 72. I need to think about my own future too. She sighed. Mum, please, it's not that deep. You've always helped me. That's just what you do. That's just what you do. 4 words, simple and sharp enough to cut through years of denial. Do you ever wonder what happens when I can't anymore? I asked. When I'm gone? Mum, she groaned. Why do you always have to make everything dramatic? You act like I owe you something. I froze. You act like I owe you something. I had heard that line before, from myself, years ago, when I was angry at my own mother for asking why I never visited. I had said it then, without thinking, the way Rebecca said it now. Only now, standing in my kitchen holding the phone, I could finally hear what it really sounded like, cruelty disguised as self-protection. I never wanted you to owe me, I whispered. I just wanted to matter. She didn't answer. I heard a baby crying in the background, David calling her name. She muttered, I gotta go. We'll talk later. The call ended. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat down at the table, staring at the wall, feeling something unravel inside me. 45 years of motherhood condensed into a single truth. I had built a daughter who believed my love was a service. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. I looked around the apartment, the photo frames, the unpaid bills, the fading flowers on the counter, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt empty. Emptiness can be merciful. It's the space where truth finally has room to speak. I stood up, opened a drawer and pulled out an old box full of receipts and letters. Hospital bills, tuition payments, mortgage checks, birthday gifts. My life, documented in ink. I spread them on the table like evidence from a trial, evidence of devotion mistaken for debt. I thought of every thank you that had ever felt rehearsed, every time she'd said love you while checking her phone, every sacrifice I had made in silence, believing silence was love. I realized then that Rebecca wasn't cruel by nature. She was raised in the shadow of my sacrifice. She had learned that love meant someone would always clean up her mess, that apologies weren't necessary because forgiveness was automatic. I was the one who taught her that. By never saying no, by never letting her see me hurt, by confusing endurance with affection. And now here we were, 2 women bound by a script I had written and she had perfected. I looked at the pile of papers, then at the reflection of myself in the window. The city lights flickered on. I whispered, I did this. The words didn't feel like guilt. They felt like clarity. For the first time in my life, I saw the difference between love and surrender. Love gives, surrender erases. I turned off the lamp, sat back down, and stared into the dark until the idea took shape. Slow, deliberate, terrifyingly calm. If my presence only caused resentment, maybe my absence would finally teach her what I was worth. That was the night the plan began, quiet as a heartbeat, sharp as a blade. I woke up the next morning before sunrise, the world still dark, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the fridge. For the first time in months, I didn't feel heavy. I felt clear, like my mind had been scrubbed raw by pain and finally saw what it needed to see. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. I wrote 1 sentence across the top of the page. If she wants me gone, she'll get her wish, but on my terms. The pen didn't shake. My hand was steady. Maybe that's what resolve feels like. Calm, not rage. I'd spent 45 years reacting, fixing, forgiving. Now I was done reacting. It was time to act. By 8 o'clock, I was dressed and ready. I wore my best clothes, the navy dress I used to save for church and special occasions. I looked at myself in the mirror. Same wrinkles, same tired eyes, but something inside them had changed. They didn't look sad anymore. They looked certain. My first stop was the bank. I'd been there so many times over the years to make deposits for Rebecca, to wire her money, to pay her bills. The teller, a young man with kind eyes, smiled as he recognized me. "Morning, Mrs. Brooks. Here to help your daughter again?" he asked. "Not this time," I said, smiling back. "Today I'm helping myself." I closed the joint account I shared with Rebecca, the one I had opened for emergencies. There was still $20,000 in it. I moved every penny into my personal account. When the teller asked if I wanted to keep the account open just in case, I shook my head. "No," I said softly, "in case already happened." The sound of the printer spitting out the closing statement felt like freedom. For years, I had poured money into that account, thinking it kept us connected. In reality, it had been my leash. My next stop was the mortgage office. I still had copies of the paperwork from when I'd co-signed their loan, a decision I had justified as helping them build stability. In truth, it was another way of saying, "Please need me." But co-signing also meant something Rebecca hadn't considered. I had rights. The loan officer, Ms. Harper, greeted me with a polite smile. "Mrs. Brooks, how can I help you?" "I'd like to review the mortgage I co-signed for my daughter, Rebecca Davis," I said. She nodded, typing quickly, and pulled up the file. "Yes, here it is. You're listed as a co-signer. You covered 8 payments last year when the primary holder couldn't. That gives you standing if you want to reassess the contract." "Meaning?" "Meaning if they default again, you can reclaim the property or trigger foreclosure procedures under shared liability." I leaned back, almost laughing. That's good to know. For once, I wasn't the desperate mother asking for leniency. I was a woman holding the pen that could rewrite the story. After the meeting, I sat in my car and looked at the papers spread across the passenger seat: account closures, mortgage clauses, my name printed in bold. For decades, that name had been invisible behind everyone else's needs. Seeing it now, legally powerful, felt like meeting myself again. My last stop was the lawyer's office. Mr. Allen, a kind man in his 70s who had handled my husband's estate years ago, he had known me as the devoted nurse with a heart too big for her wallet. When I walked in, he looked surprised. "Evelyn," he said, standing to shake my hand. "It's been years. What brings you here today?" I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table. "I want to change my will," I said simply. His eyebrows lifted. "Something wrong with your daughter?" "Something right with me," I replied. He smiled faintly. "All right then, tell me what you'd like to do." And I told him, every detail. The new beneficiary would be a foundation for underprivileged children, not Rebecca. A trust fund would be set up for my grandchildren, but they wouldn't touch a cent until they turned 25. My life insurance, my apartment, my savings, everything would be reassigned. Alan listened quietly, nodding, his expression soft but proud. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been sure of anything," I said. By the time I left his office, the sun was setting. I stopped by the pier before heading home. The water was calm, golden. I thought about Rebecca's words, "Just die already," and for the first time, they didn't hurt, because the woman who had begged for her daughter's love had already died. What was left was someone new, someone finally ready to live. When I got home that evening, the air felt different. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the smell of it, quiet, new, almost sweet. I poured a glass of wine, something I hadn't done in years, and sat by the window. Outside, Charleston was settling into its golden hour, the streets glowing, the church bells echoing from somewhere downtown. For the first time, I didn't feel like a bystander in my own life. I felt like a woman with a secret. I picked up the phone and called Maggie Lawson, my next-door neighbour, the only person who had seen me cry in the hallway after that birthday. She answered on the second ring. "Evelyn?" "Maggie, can you come over? I need to talk." 10 minutes later, she was sitting in my kitchen, her silver hair tied up, wearing that floral scarf she always wore when something serious was about to happen. She listened as I told her everything, the words Rebecca had said, the accounts I'd closed, the new will. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she leaned back and said quietly, "So what's next?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "I'm going to disappear." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "Disappear?" "Yes, not die, just vanish. Let her live exactly the life she said she wanted, one without me in it." A small grin tugged at Maggie's lips. "That's dramatic. I like it." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "You used to teach drama, didn't you?" 30 years, she said proudly, "and you're giving me one hell of a final act." We spent hours at that kitchen table, sketching out a plan that sounded half crazy and half genius. I'd book a flight, not a short trip, something far, somewhere Rebecca would never think to look. I'd leave a letter behind, one she couldn't ignore. It would explain everything, every dollar, every sacrifice, every moment she mistook love for obligation. It would be my confession and her wake-up call. "Make it long," Maggie said. "Make it hurt." "Oh, it will," I replied, and we both laughed again, a low, conspiratorial sound. I went to bed that night feeling lighter than I had in years. The decision was made. I wasn't waiting to be loved anymore. I was writing my own ending. The next morning, I woke up early and opened my laptop. I typed "retirement relocation abroad" and scrolled through pages until one caught my eye: "Live your second life in Switzerland." The pictures were ridiculous. Mountains, lakes, quiet streets, smiling people holding coffee cups. It looked too peaceful to be real. But peace was exactly what I wanted. I called the agency. A woman with a soft voice answered. "Good morning, Mrs. Brooks. How can we help you?" "I'm looking to start over," I said. She laughed gently. "Aren't we all?" By the time I hung up, I had a one-way ticket to Zurich and a detailed packet on how to transfer my pension internationally. I sat back, staring at the confirmation email. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. That afternoon, I began packing. I didn't take much, just clothes, photos, the old journal I'd started writing in again. Every item I folded felt like a decision: what to take, what to leave, what to finally let go. As I zipped up the suitcase, my phone rang. Rebecca's name lit up on the screen. For a second, my heart wavered. Maybe she could sense something. Maybe she was calling to say sorry. I answered. "Mom," she said briskly, "I need you to watch the twins Friday night. David and I have a work dinner." I almost laughed. "I can't, sweetheart. I have plans." "What plans?" she asked, surprised. "Since when do you have plans?" I smiled into the silence. "Since today," she sighed. "You're being weird, Mom. Just let me know if you change your mind." "I won't." I hung up before she could say anything else. The quiet that followed was delicious. For once, I had said no, not out of anger, but out of freedom. That night, Maggie came over again with a stack of envelopes. "One for your letter," she said, sliding the thickest one across the table. "And one for me to keep, just in case anyone comes asking." "You'll know what to tell them?" I asked. Maggie winked. "Oh, honey, I've been waiting my whole life for a role like this." We both laughed until tears filled our eyes. But this time they weren't the kind that hurt. They were the kind that meant something was ending, and something else was finally beginning. By Wednesday morning, everything was ready. The suitcase sat by the door, half the size of the life I'd lived, but big enough for the life I wanted next. I moved slowly through the apartment, touching the things I was leaving behind. The clock that still ticked 2 minutes late, the chair with a stain from Rebecca's first birthday, the photo of Mark and me before the world took him. I didn't feel sad, just done, like a nurse clocking out after a lifetime shift. I made one last pot of coffee, poured it into the chipped mug that said "Best Mom Ever," and smiled at the irony. Then I opened my notebook and began writing the letter. Not to beg, not to explain, just to tell the truth. "My dear Rebecca, you once asked me to disappear. By the time you read this, I will have done exactly that." I wrote for hours, the words pouring out like they'd been waiting for years. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every dollar spent, every time I said yes when I wanted to say no, I listed it all, not as revenge but as a record. I wanted her to see the invisible weight she had mistaken for unconditional love. I gave you everything because I thought that's what good mothers do. But I realize now that I didn't raise you to love, I raised you to expect. That's on me. And this goodbye isn't punishment. It's freedom, for both of us. When I finished, my hand was cramping and my eyes burned from tears I didn't remember starting. I read it once, folded it neatly, and slipped it into the big white envelope Maggie had given me. Beside it, I placed copies of all the legal documents, the new will, the trust fund, the account closures, a mother's love, signed, notarized, and finally retired. At noon, Maggie knocked. She brought sandwiches we didn't eat and coffee we didn't drink. We just sat there in silence, letting time run out on one version of my life. When she finally stood, she squeezed my hand. "You sure you want to go through with this?" "I've never been more sure," I said. She nodded. "Then let's make it count." I handed her the spare keys to my apartment. "You'll wait 2 days, then tell her you couldn't reach me. Say you found the letter on the table." Maggie slipped the keys into her pocket. "I'll make it convincing. I did win a few local theatre awards, you know." I smiled. "That's why I trust you." At 3, I showered, put on my softest sweater, and did something I hadn't done in years. Put on perfume. Not the floral one Rebecca always said smelled too old, but the musky scent Mark had loved. It felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself I'd buried decades ago. I looked around the apartment one last time. Everything was in order, clean, still, waiting to be forgotten. On the kitchen table sat the letter, the envelope perfectly scented beside the untouched mug that still read "Best Mum Ever." The phone rang once. Rebecca. I watched it light up and fade out. Then it rang again and again. The sound didn't hurt this time. It sounded like proof that I'd finally stopped being predictable. By 5, the cab was downstairs. Maggie came to help with the bags, her eyes glistening. "Where to?" she asked softly. "The airport," I said. We rode in silence until we reached the corner. She grabbed my hand. "Promise me something," she said. "What?" "Don't look back. Whatever happens, don't look back." I squeezed her hand. "I won't." She nodded, then smiled through her tears. "Then go live, Evelyn. For once, just live." The cab driver loaded my suitcase, and I slid into the back seat. As we pulled away, I watched the city blur through the window. The coffee shop where I used to meet Rebecca, the hospital where I'd spent half my life, the park where I once pushed her stroller. They drifted past like scenes from someone else's story. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the glass, an old woman with tired eyes and a new kind of calm. I didn't recognize her completely, but I liked her. When we reached the airport, I tipped the driver too much. Old habits die hard. Then I stood there for a moment, the cold air biting at my face, the sound of planes echoing in the distance. I thought about Rebecca, probably scrolling through her phone, not realizing yet that this time I wasn't coming back. I took a deep breath, stepped inside, and whispered under my breath, "You wanted me gone, darling. Now you'll learn what gone really means." The flight to Zurich was long, but not heavy. 12 hours above the clouds felt like a pause between 2 lives, one ending quietly, one still waiting to begin. I didn't watch the movies, didn't talk to anyone. I just sat there with my eyes closed, replaying the last 45 years like an old film that had finally reached its credits. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I realized I wasn't afraid. For the first time in decades, I belonged to no one. When the plane landed, the air felt cleaner, sharper, like it hadn't been touched by regret. A driver from the relocation agency held a sign with my name, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks. I followed him through the airport, through customs, through a city that felt impossibly calm. My apartment was small but warm, a 5th-floor walk-up with a window overlooking a park full of people who didn't know who I was. That anonymity was a gift. I opened the window, let the cold air sting my face, and smiled. Somewhere across the ocean, my daughter still thought I was home, sitting by the phone, but I wasn't home, not anymore. Back in Charleston, the first domino fell 2 days later. Maggie waited exactly as we'd planned. 48 hours of unanswered calls, then a gentle knock on my apartment door. She waited, knocked again, called my name loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Nothing. Then she used the spare keys, walked in, and gasped so perfectly it could have won her an award. "Oh my God," she whispered to the empty room. The coffee mug still sat on the counter. The letter lay on the table, sealed, exactly where I'd left it. Within an hour, Rebecca was on the phone, panicked. Maggie told her what she'd found, voice trembling just the right amount. "Her bed hasn't been slept in," Maggie said. "The lights were off, her suitcase is gone, and there's a letter for you on the table." Rebecca's voice cracked. "A letter? What does it say?" "I didn't read it," Maggie lied. "I thought you should see it first." "I'm coming over," Rebecca said. When she arrived, she was shaking. The twins waited in the car. David followed behind her, quiet. Maggie met them at the door and handed her the envelope. Rebecca's hands trembled as she tore it open. The first page was short. "You asked me to disappear." So I did. David said later that she read in silence for nearly 10 minutes, her face changing from confusion to disbelief to something like horror. When she reached the list of sacrifices, every loan, every payment, every moment of my exhaustion turned into numbers on a page. Her tears came fast. "She's not dead," David whispered. "She just left." But Rebecca didn't hear him. She was stuck on one line near the end. "You will never understand what you had until you lose it completely." She threw the letter down, pacing, her breathing sharp. "She can't just leave like this. She wouldn't." Maggie put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe she finally believed you." Rebecca turned on her. "You think this is my fault?" Maggie didn't flinch. "I think she gave you exactly what you asked for." The argument went nowhere. By the time they left, Rebecca looked hollow. Maggie told me later that she kept saying the same thing over and over in the parking lot. She wouldn't do this to me, not my mum. But I had. That night in Zurich, I poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the silence. It wasn't revenge, not really. It was a reckoning. Every phone call unanswered, every ungrateful sigh, every cruel word. Now she'd sit in that quiet and finally hear them echo back. The next morning, my phone buzzed. 23 missed calls, 10 messages. The first few were frantic. "Mum, where are you? Maggie said you're gone. Please call me." Then came anger. "This isn't funny. You're scaring everyone." Then came fear. "I called the police. They said you might have left town. Did you? Why?" I didn't answer. I made breakfast instead, soft scrambled eggs and toast, and ate by the window while church bells rang outside. The life I'd been begging for, one without demands, without guilt, was finally mine. By the second day, Rebecca's messages grew desperate. "If you don't call, I'll report you missing." Then softer. "Please, Mum. I didn't mean what I said. You know that. Please come home." But she didn't understand. I wasn't coming home because there was no home left to go to. At 2 a.m, I received a single text that stayed on the screen for a long time before I deleted it. "Mum, if you're really gone, I'm sorry." I whispered to the dark, "No, you're not. Not yet." Back in Charleston, Maggie told the neighbours I'd gone on an extended trip, that I'd needed a break. She played her role perfectly, concerned but protective. When the police came, she handed them the letter, said she had no forwarding address. She wanted peace, Maggie said, her eyes steady. She deserved it. And just like that, I was gone. In a city across the ocean, I closed my eyes that night and slept deeply, without guilt, without fear, without the weight of anyone's expectations. Rebecca wanted a world without me. Now she had it. 3 days passed before I answered. By then, the panic had become a pattern, calls every hour, messages stacking up like a confession she couldn't stop writing. At first, I ignored them. I told myself it was better that way, but guilt is stubborn, even when you know you've earned your peace. On the fourth day, as the church bells struck 5, the phone rang again. I let it buzz once, twice, 3 times. Then I picked it up. Hello? Mom? Her voice cracked like glass. Oh my God, it's really you. Where are you? Please, please just tell me where you are. I looked out the window at the lake, the water glinting under the evening light. Somewhere you can't reach me, I said softly. What does that mean? You can't just disappear. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? I know exactly what I've done, I said. I gave you what you asked for. You wanted me gone. Now you get to see what gone really feels like. She inhaled sharply. Mom, that was just a stupid thing I said. I didn't mean it. I was angry. No, Rebecca, I said quietly. You were honest. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. Please, she whispered. I can't sleep. I keep thinking about that letter. The way you listed everything, every dollar, every sacrifice. I didn't know it was that much. You didn't want to know, I replied. Love isn't supposed to come with receipts, right? Except somehow it always does when only one person is paying the bill. Mom, stop. Please, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for everything I said. I believe you're sorry for the consequences, I said. Not for the words. Her voice rose, breaking. That's not fair. You left us. The kids are asking where you are. David's a mess. The house, we might lose the house. Don't you care what happens to us? I stared at my reflection in the glass, an old woman with calm eyes and a steady heartbeat. Of course I care. That's the problem. I've cared my whole life, cared so much I forgot who I was. Then come back, she begged. Please, we can fix this. You don't have to do this. Rebecca, I said slowly, what exactly are you trying to fix? The part where you told me to die or the part where I believed you? She didn't answer. I heard a sob, muffled, raw. I didn't mean it, she said again. I was tired. The kids were screaming. David lost his job. I lost it. I understand, I said, and I meant it. But understanding doesn't erase it. Once words are spoken, they live, and yours lived long enough to bury the mother you remember. The silence between us stretched thin. Somewhere outside, a child laughed in the distance, the sound small and bright against the heaviness in my chest. Do you remember, I said softly, when you were little and you used to draw me hearts on post-it notes? You'd stick them all over the fridge. One morning, I came home from a night shift and found one that said, I love you more than pancakes. I still have it. She sniffled. You do? I kept them all, I said, because back then you meant it. She was crying now, real crying, not the polished kind that expects comfort. Please, Mum, I need you. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to live without you. Do you need me? I asked quietly. Or do you need my money? Her breathing caught. She didn't answer. That's what I thought, I said. Mum, that's not... It's okay, I interrupted. It's not your fault. You learned from me. I taught you that love always gives, no matter how much it costs. I never showed you what boundaries look like. That's my mistake, and I'm correcting it now. Please don't hang up, she said, voice shaking. I'll change. I swear. I'll be better. Maybe, I said, but I won't be there to see it. She started to say something else, but I pressed the phone closer to my ear and whispered, I love you, Rebecca. I always have. But loving you doesn't mean I have to keep breaking myself to prove it. Then I hung up. The phone rang again. I turned it face down on the table. It rang once, twice, then went silent. I poured a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The night air was cool, the city lights glittering like 1,000 tiny exits. Somewhere out there, my daughter was learning what absence really feels like. And I, for the first time in my life, was learning what freedom sounded like. The soft, perfect sound of nothing at all. A week passed before the storm hit. I should have known it wouldn't end with that call. Silence never lasts long in a family built on noise. It began with an email from my lawyer, Mr. Allen. His subject line was short and sharp: "Call me immediately." When I did, his voice came through with that mix of concern and restrained amusement only old lawyers seem to master. "Evelyn," he said, "you're not going to believe this. Your daughter's trying to declare you mentally unfit." I laughed, a dry sound. "Of course she is. She's filed a complaint with Family Services, claims you're showing signs of dementia, that you've been manipulated into changing your will and transferring your assets." I leaned back in my chair. Outside, the Swiss morning was soft, all fog and calm, and here I was being declared crazy from across the ocean. "So she's decided if she can't control me, she'll rewrite me." "She's hired a lawyer," Alan continued. "They're trying to block the new will, but don't worry, legally, you're covered. Every document you signed was witnessed and recorded." "That's good," I said. "Still, let her try. She might finally learn what paperwork looks like when it's not written in her favor." After we hung up, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, staring at my hands. I used to think they were made for holding: bottles, babies, hope. Now they were signing weapons of my own making. That afternoon, I got the call from the American consulate. A polite woman named Mrs. Walsh explained that, due to the complaint, I'd need to undergo a wellness evaluation. "It's just a formality," she assured me. "Standard protocol when a family member expresses concern." I smiled. Concern. That's a nice word for control. 2 days later, I walked into the consulate, perfectly dressed, hair neat, documents in hand. The doctor they assigned was an older man with gentle eyes and an accent that made everything sound like wisdom. He asked me questions about dates, about names, about my choices. I answered calmly, precisely. When he asked why I'd decided to move to Switzerland, I said, "Because peace is a kind of medicine my daughter couldn't prescribe." He smiled. "You seem remarkably clear, Mrs. Brooks. I'd even say healthier than most people your age." I chuckled. "Trauma will do that. It cleans out all the illusions." After 3 hours, he shook my hand and said, "You're perfectly sane, perfectly capable, and exceptionally brave." "Please put all of that in writing," I said. He did. When the official report was filed, it didn't just clear my name, it documented Rebecca's false claim as unfounded and malicious. The social worker who'd handled her complaint called me personally. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "I have to tell you, in 20 years of doing this, I've rarely seen a case so obviously manipulative. We're closing it immediately." "Thank you," I said, "and please, make sure the record reflects that she lied." It already does. That night, I opened a bottle of red wine and toasted the quiet again. Not the sad quiet of absence, the proud quiet of justice. For decades, I had given her everything she asked for, and the first time I gave her a boundary, she tried to destroy it. But boundaries don't break when they're built from survival. 3 days later, Alan called again. "Congratulations, Evelyn. Case dismissed. And there's more. Her attempt to freeze your assets backfired. The courts flagged her claim as fraudulent. She'll be facing a fine if she keeps pushing." I didn't smile. I just nodded to myself. Good. Maybe consequences will teach her what love never could. That night, I sat by the window with my journal open, writing down every step of what had happened. The lies, the letters, the phone calls, the silence that followed. I wanted it all recorded, not for vengeance, but for memory. Because one day, when the guilt tried to crawl back, I'd need to remember the truth. I hadn't abandoned her. I had escaped her. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight. Somewhere back in Charleston, Rebecca was learning that losing me didn't just mean losing my presence. It meant losing her safety net, her leverage, her last excuse. For the first time in my life, I slept like someone who didn't owe anyone anything. 2 days after the case was closed, I woke up before dawn, heart strangely light. For months, I had been living like a fugitive from my own life. Now, with that one letter from the consulate, I was free again, officially sane, legally untouchable, and finally invisible to the people who once defined me. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the fog lift over the lake. The quiet no longer felt empty, it felt earned. That morning, something in me shifted. I had spent years being silent, silenced by love, by duty, by the endless noise of other people's needs. But silence, I realized, only protects those who hurt you. Maybe it was time to use my voice for once, not to beg, not to defend, but to tell the truth. So I began to write. I opened my laptop and started a document titled, "When a Mother's Love Becomes Self-Destruction." The words came like breath after drowning. I wrote about the nights in the hospital, about the sacrifices that blurred into self-erasure, about the day my daughter told me the best gift I could give her was death. I didn't soften anything. I didn't make excuses. I just told it straight. The story of how a woman can lose herself while trying to be everything for everyone. 4 hours later, I hit send and mailed it to a small online publication for women over 50, the kind that posts essays about grief, aging, and survival. I didn't expect a reply. I just wanted the story to exist somewhere outside my head. But 2 days later, I got an email from the editor. "Evelyn, your story is breathtaking. It's raw, painful, and universal. Would you let us share it on our website and YouTube channel?" I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back one word: yes. The interview was simple. They called me over video, asked me to talk about motherhood, about forgiveness, about what happens when love turns into obligation. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just spoke. Calm, clear, steady. When they asked if I regretted leaving, I said, "Regret is just guilt wearing perfume. I left because I had to, not to hurt her, but to finally stop hurting myself." The video went online a week later. I didn't think much of it, but by the next morning there were thousands of comments. Then tens of thousands. Women from all over the world were writing to me, nurses, mothers, grandmothers, saying they saw themselves in my words. "My daughter speaks to me the same way. I've been financing my son's life for 30 years. I thought I was alone." Reading them felt like breathing new air. For the first time, my pain wasn't shame. It was proof that I hadn't been crazy, that what I'd lived through had a name, emotional abuse dressed as family loyalty. News outlets picked up the story. People called me the mother who chose herself. I didn't like the title, but I understood why they used it. It wasn't about rebellion, it was about survival. A week later, my inbox filled again, messages from daughters this time. One read, "I saw your interview with my mum. We watched it together in silence. Then she cried and hugged me. I never realized what she carried. Thank you." That one undid me. I sat there with tears rolling down my face, not because I was sad, but because I finally knew my story had done something good. My suffering had been repurposed into something that helped someone else stop theirs. Later that evening, I walked by the lake, the air cold and clean. I watched the sunset turn the water pink and gold, and I thought about all the women who had written to me, about the ones who couldn't leave and the ones who finally did. I whispered to the sky, "We made it out." When I got back to my apartment, I lit a candle, not for grief, but for gratitude, for survival, for peace, for the part of me that had died and the part that had finally been reborn. Somewhere I imagined Rebecca scrolling through her phone, seeing my face on the screen, realizing that I had lived, truly lived, without her permission. Maybe she was angry, maybe she was ashamed, maybe she understood. It didn't matter, because I no longer needed her to. For the first time in my 72 years, I belonged entirely to myself. It's strange the things you notice once the noise is gone. The mornings feel longer now, the air tastes cleaner, even silence has a shape, not the heavy kind that presses on your chest, but the soft kind that makes you feel safe inside your own thoughts. Sometimes I still wake up expecting the phone to ring, expecting to hear Rebecca's voice asking for something, and when it doesn't, I smile. Freedom has a quiet rhythm to it, and I'm finally learning the tune. I walk every morning around the lake. The water changes color with the sky, silver at dawn, gold by noon, deep blue at sunset. I used to think peace was something you earned after forgiveness. But I've learned that peace doesn't need an apology to exist. It only needs distance. People still write to me. Every day I open my email and find stories. Women who watched the interview and saw their own reflections in it. One said she sold her big house and moved into a small cabin near her sister. Another said she stopped paying her grown son's debts and slept through the night for the first time in years. Some write just to say thank you. Others write to ask, how did you know it was time to leave? I always tell them the same thing. You'll know when the love you're giving starts costing your sanity. That's when it's time. Sometimes I reread the letter I left for Rebecca, not out of regret, but to remember the woman I used to be. I don't hate her. I pity her a little. The way she mistook control for care, the way she believed love meant staying no matter what. I want to tell her she did her best. She just forgot that love has two sides, and one of them should always face herself. A few months ago, I got a message from a young woman named Andrea. She said she was 30, with a 65-year-old mother who had given her everything. After reading my story, she called her mum for the first time in months. We cried, she wrote. She said she felt seen for the first time. You helped me stop before I became Rebecca. That message undid me. I sat by the window for a long time, holding my cup of tea, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. My pain had turned into someone else's healing. Maybe that's what redemption really is. Not forgiveness, but usefulness. Sometimes people ask if I ever plan to go back, to see Rebecca again. I tell them I don't know. The truth is, I love her. I always will. But love doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean I have to stand where I was hurt. I can love her from here, from a country away, from a life she doesn't get to own anymore. I think about my grandchildren often. They're growing up fast, probably asking questions Rebecca doesn't know how to answer. Maybe one day they'll understand the truth. Maybe one day they'll find me. If they do, they'll find a grandmother who's alive, whole, and unashamed. That's a better inheritance than any money I could have left behind. There are still nights when memories visit, the hospital hallways, the long drives home, the laughter at that birthday party that turned into a funeral for my illusions. I let those memories sit beside me for a while. Then I thank them for coming and let them leave. Healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without bleeding. Last week, I spoke at a small women's retreat in Zurich. The room was full of grey hair and brave eyes. We talked about guilt, about duty, about the invisible contracts that mothers sign without reading the fine print. One woman asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" I thought about it for a moment and said no, because if they had, I might still be living someone else's version of my life. Pain showed me who I really was. I just wish it hadn't taken so long to listen. The women nodded, and I could see it. The recognition, the shared understanding. We had all been someone's anchor for too long. We had all forgotten that anchors are meant to hold ships, not drown with them. When I got home that evening, I stood on the balcony, the sky painted in soft pink and violet. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I forgive you, Rebecca." And I meant it, not because she deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to her. It was a door I opened for myself. I still keep one of her childhood drawings on my nightstand. It's a crayon heart with the words, "Me and Mommy Forever," written in crooked letters. The paper's yellowed now, the edges curled, but every time I look at it, I feel peace. Not the naive kind I once chased, but the kind that grows after the storm. Calm, humble, and strong. Love didn't die in me, it just stopped bowing. Maybe that's the truest thing I've learned. Love isn't measured by how much you endure. It's measured by how much of yourself you're willing to keep. And sometimes, disappearing isn't running away. It's finding the only place left where you can finally be whole. It's been 3 years since that birthday, 3 years since the day my daughter wished me gone, and in a way gave me back to myself. I'm 75 now. My hair's turned silver, my steps are slower, but my heart feels lighter than it ever did at 40. I spend my mornings on the balcony, looking at the Alps rising in the distance. The air here is sharp and honest. It doesn't lie to you the way people sometimes do. Last week, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The handwriting was clumsy but familiar, the uneven scrawl of 10-year-olds who had once called me grandma. I opened it carefully. Inside were 2 drawings, one of me standing by the mountains with a cup of tea, another of a big red heart that said, "We love you, Grandma, you're our hero." The note was simple. Dad told us the truth. Mum said she was sorry. We hope we can see you one day. I sat there, holding that letter against my chest, and for a long time I couldn't speak. The tears came, but they weren't bitter. They were soft, like rain washing over old stone. Maybe that's what healing really is, when love finally returns, not to take, but to give. I looked out at the sky and whispered, "Maybe one day, my loves, maybe one day." Then I smiled, because even if that day never came, they would still know the most important thing, that their grandmother lived, not broken, not defeated, but whole. I am Evelyn Brooks, where true stories are told with honesty, so that everyone can find their own strength. If this story touched you, please support us by leaving a comment below, subscribing to the channel and sharing it with your friends. Thank you for listening all the way through. May God bless you and your family.